Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Travis Widerski. I'm a welding engineer here with Miller Electric. Thanks for joining us today. Today I'm joined by Chris Rail, one of our product managers within Miller. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the MIG welding history, some of the older style 3-in-1 machines, and some of the original all-in-one MIG welding machines, and talk a little bit about how that technology has taken us to where we are today with some of the Multimatic type machines that are 3-in-1 machines that do everything really well. So Chris, do you want to introduce kind of who you are, where you've been with the company real briefly?
Sure. My name is Chris Rail. I've been with Miller Electric for 34 years. For the last 17 years, I have been the product manager for the Millermatic product line. Prior to that, I was in our service department, and I also spent some time out in the field as an application specialist. So today I'm hoping to share some of my experiences I learned working with Miller Electric, and also to answer some of your questions on MIG and multiprocess machines.
Excellent. And like I said, I'm a welding engineer. I've been with Miller a little over 10 years. We've also got James on the line. He's going to be your connection through the chat function. If you guys have questions, please put them out there. James will connect back to us so we can try to answer some of the questions that you guys have live. This is going to be pretty fast-paced, trying to keep this one short for you guys. But we do have an email that you guys can reach out to. That's going to be shoptalklive@millerwelds.com. James will put that out there. If you guys have questions that we don't get to live, you can ask them there. Also, if you guys have any topics for future events that you guys would like to see, please drop them there as well. So like I said, we're going to start with a little bit of the history of where Miller Electric started with some of the all-in-one MIG machines. And again, if you guys have any questions, please drop them either in the chat to James so he can get them to us, and then we'll go from there. But one of the first all-in-one style MIG machines that Miller had was the Millermatic 35. And Chris, do you want to walk us through a little bit of why that machine was revolutionary back when those came out?
Sure. Back in the late 60s, probably stick welding was really the only process that was available to people with single-phase power. Now, MIG welding was available for larger companies that had three-phase capabilities, but talking to customers in small fab shops that have single-phase power, they're looking for more productivity. Insurance companies were looking for ways for body shops to do a better job repairing vehicles, and people are just looking for an easier, cleaner way to weld at home. So at that time, Miller realized there was a need for a single-phase MIG welding machine. So like Travis said, in 1971, Miller released the Millermatic 35, which was the first in the industry to be an all-in-one single-phase MIG welding machine. So
Right.
as far as calling it a Millermatic 35, why was it called the Millermatic 35? The reason is back in 1971, 035 wire was the most popular wire being used, and 100% CO2 was the most popular gas. So what the engineers did is that they designed the transformer and the stabilizer and all the welding components inside to optimize the arc starts and the weld performance for that wire and gas combination. Now,
Right.
on the downside, if somebody would want to use a different wire or gas, the arc quality could have been compromised.
Right. And like Chris said, this was revolutionary from the fact of it being all in one case. So that's something we take for granted today. Of a lot of the MIG welding only machines are all in one case. The spool of wire is protected, where the original machines and some of the more advanced machines you see today are still that way, but they were a power source with a wire feeder with a gun. And you can see on the face of this machine, a lot of that was not internal to the machine. It was all in the faceplate. And if we look at the internals of that machine, like Chris said, this was all controlled by a transformer. So those were big pieces of copper. To get something different as an output out of this machine, you either had to change the physical wraps on that transformer or on the stabilizer to get a different arc characteristic. So you physically had to change something. And if we look at that faceplate, again, we'll a little bit here in a little bit, that you could grab some different taps in there, but you didn't have control completely. You had to give and take along the way. So you couldn't run an extremely nice low end, typically with an extremely nice top end on a lot of these machines. So that's where Chris was coming back to the 035 type of machine. If we look a little bit further down the line, we got feedback that people wanted to, try to have one machine that would kind of do it all. There's some issues there in the fact that, especially when we start mixing processes like stick, TIG, MIG, you've got two different types of machines there, with a CC machine versus a CV machine. So Chris, you want to talk through what some of the challenges were there on these early machines like the Shopmaster?
Sure. The Shopmaster, when we came out with that, that was the late 80s. And that, again, was also a transformer-based machine. So like Travis said, when it was designed for a specific wire, gas, for stick welding, a specific electrode. And what at the time was it did a good job with everything, but it didn't really do anything great. You know, it was a good fabrication machine. And the other thing is that looking at that picture, you see there's a whole lot of stuff going on right there. You got a welding machine, you got cables. That's an HF box on top of the machine if they wanted to TIG weld. If you wanted to MIG weld, you had to go and buy an external MIG welder. So there's a lot of cables, a lot of things going on. Matter of fact, when I was in the field and we'd have to go on Shopmaster calls, a lot of times what we would do is we'd bring along electrical tape, colored electrical tape, so that way we would color code the cables and the output studs for the different processes. So when people would have to switch processes, they knew what cables and what connectors on the machine they had to hook it up to. So at the time, you know, it was a good machine. And, you know, basically at that time, transformer-based multi-process machines kind of had the reputation of a machine that was a jack of all trades, maybe master of one.
Right. And like Chris said, this picture is actually missing the feeder as well. So you'd have another piece here if you wanted this to be a MIG welding machine as well. And for anybody who's familiar with these older style transformer machines, they're a big piece of copper to get a similar output from what some of these inverter style machines were. So as a comparison, this machine is going to be similar in output. It's going to be just a little bit lighter duty than what the Shopmaster was in some aspects, and very similar in others. But if you look at the physical size difference in these, you're talking a lot of floor space difference here as well, and power. We'll talk about that a little bit coming up as well. Those older style transformer machines loved power, especially when you get on the AC TIG welding side of things. But again, Chris, coming back to what Chris had mentioned on the transformers, to get a different output, we physically had to grab a different portion of the internals of that machine to get a different output. Where on these newer style machines, we're going to an inverter base. A lot of what is heard today, even in the home consumer market, is going to inverters. And the big difference is what is this machine truly controlled by? Again, on these older transformer style machines, that was going to be a piece of copper. On these newer inverter machines, what we're referring to is truly the internals of the machine are an inverter-based PC that controls that output power. So we're no longer limited to the 60 hertz power that we got coming out of the wall, being able to modify it slightly with some magnetics, and then having an output that's okay for some processes, great for some, and you try to combine them, a lot of them end up being just okay all the way around. So inverter technology is really what's driving a lot of the newer 3-in-1 machines. So again, that Shopmaster was one of our first 3-in-1 process machines, where something like the Mullermatic family of products we'll talk about a little bit coming up, these newer inverters really do everything well because we can control the electronics so much better than what we had in the past. Now, one thing I want to clarify, though, is this technology is not brand new. We've had inverters going back to probably the late 80s, early 90s, but the problem was the cost back then. So typically it was limited to companies that truly needed a function out of an inverter style machine. Now, fast forward to today, we've got a lot of technology, same as your phone, right? How much storage is in your phone, these computers that we have today versus back then, all of that technology is getting less and less expensive. So you're going to see that come even more and more in the home hobby market and up because the electronics are much more affordable. So it's not necessarily a new technology, but it is something that's fairly new to a less expensive machine. So Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about the 220 and some of the newer style inverter 3-in-1 machines that we have today?
Sure. Like Travis mentioned, the nice thing about the inverter is now that the weld engineers can actually optimize the arc performance for all of the wires, the diameters, the gases, the stick electrodes that are within the spec of the machine. So, right now, as part this machine, instead of it just being designed for a 035 wire with 100% CO2, you can actually use it now for MIG, for flux cord, for stainless steel, for aluminum, mild steel with 75-25, 100% CO2. So for stick welding, you can go in there and on the display, it'll give you options to select the different electrodes that you're using. So, you know, the inverter technology, it actually optimizes the performance so that instead of like the older multi-process machines, where it's a jack of all trades, master of one, I look at these newer machines more of a jack of all trades, master of all.
Right. Along the way too, we can actually alleviate some of the complexity with these machines versus the older ones, and we'll have that faceplate picture coming up here in a little bit. But a few other things that we gain coming to an inverter, like we had talked a little bit ago, size is something that's pretty big. A lot of people in their home shop don't have room for another refrigerator size machine out there, or the power to draw for it. If we look at some of these older style TIG machines, especially when we get on AC and get out of balance, really start drawing some input power. So a machine a similar size output to the Multimatic 220 AC/DC back then, you could have running off a 100 or 120 amp breaker versus a 30 amp breaker. So even if you had the means in the shop floor to do that, you also had to make sure you had the power to run those type of machines, where we're doing that much more efficiently on these newer generation of machines than what we could have done back then, let alone from how we can control it on the output side. For some of these machines too, not only can we run on more efficient power, we can also run on multiple different powers, right, Chris?
Yes, as far as the new inverter machines, we have a large variety. Some of the smaller units have technology called MVP technology, where it can work off of 120 or 240 capabilities. And then some of the larger machine, our Multimatic 255, has a technology in it called Autoline technology, where it can run from 208 up to 575 volts. And the nice thing about that is the name reflects it's Autoline. There are no jumper links or tools to change your primary voltage. You just plug it into the wall. The machine will automatically detect what voltage it is, and it's going to give you the desired output, for the primary power that's coming in. And if it's 208 power coming in or 575, the machine does not get derated at all. So you get the same rated output on 208 as you get on 575.
And that's going to be an advantage for a lot of people in their home garage as well. The 120 240 side of things more than anything, and that's something that we've got on a lot of these machines with the multi-voltage plug, in that whether it's you want to take it on the road, you want to hook it up to a generator, you want to take it in a race car trailer, something like that, where you don't necessarily have 240 capability, the machine still has a really nice low end, even on the 120 side of things. You're not going to lose quality of output going down to 120, correct?
Right.
You're going to have a very similar output as if you were on the 240 side and just ran the same settings. And again, coming back to a generator, if you want to take it with you, you can run on a much smaller generator because we're not pulling the power that we would have on these older style machines as well.
And that's the same true for people who are out in the MRO markets. If they want to go out and weld thicker gauge material at more sites, typically in the past, a transformer-based machine with SCRs, when it was hooked up to the generator, there were some issues with the output of the machine. You would have to derate that machine hooking it up to a generator. That's not the case with an inverter power supply.
Right. Like you said, they're basically going to compensate for any power that you give them to a certain degree, where, for anybody who's used to or familiar with generators, that power is not perfectly clean. Even on the newest of generators, it gets a whole lot better than it used to be, but there's still what they call dirty power. So you got spikes in there where your power is not always perfect. On the older style machines, if you hook those up to a generator and you were welding through that peak or valley, you're going to see that in the weld output, where these newer style inverter machines will actually level that more of an average type of look at the power, and you're going to have a consistent output no matter what your power in, to a certain degree, looks like. Right? Another spot where we see that being extremely helpful in people in their home garage is if you have 120 in your garage today, but you plan to have an expansion to go to 240 someday, or had the ability to run off a generator if you needed the high end of that machine. Because most of these machines, you're not going to get full output on the 120 side. So we don't want to be misleading there. If you got a 3/8 machine, you're not going to weld 3/8 on the 115 side or the 120 side with the MIG side of things. But as soon as you go to that 240 power, you have that higher end machine. So you're not losing that capability either. So you can kind of plan for the future with some of these machines in that way too. So one of the things we had talked about is a lot of the simplicity that we can gain from these style machines. Chris has talked a lot about AutoSet, and we can pull up a little bit bigger picture of that here in a second. But one of the things we want to stress is if you look at the front panel of the old Millermatic 35 versus these newer style machines, again, you see all the yellow jack plugs on the front of that machine. That's how we were physically tapping into a different spot within the internals of that machine. So you had a lot of variable there. You can see a lot of the parts were actually external on that for the different wiring and things like that, where the faceplate and the AutoSet technology that is built into a lot of the newer inverter style machines, or even in the more advanced machines, the different user interfaces are so much more convenient to use and less complicated than they were on a lot of the older machines, if you didn't, especially if you didn't know exactly what those functions meant. So I'm going to pull up here on the face of that machine. Like I said, we've got the AutoSet faceplate here. Chris, do you want to walk us through exactly kind of how the AutoSet on these machines work and what that would look like if I were going to set this up?
Sure. You know, Travis had on the picture with the side-by-side with the Multimatic 2 or Multimatic 35 and the 220 AC/DC. I mentioned earlier with the Shopmaster where we color-coded cables. You saw on that screen it actually had a display that showed when you change your processes, where do you hook your cables up? So again, it was very intuitive for the customer. And, you know, looking at this front panel, how our machines work, you have a process called AutoSet or the manual mode. So if people still want to go and set voltage and wire feed speed independently, they can do that. If you want to use our AutoSet feature, either the AutoSet or AutoSet Elite, if you look at that display on the left-hand side, you have a process button where you can go through and select the options. Do you want to MIG weld? Like I said, the different MIG options. Do you want to stick weld? Do you want a DC TIG weld if you're doing steel or stainless steel applications? So all those MIG options you see on this screen, those are available in our inverter Millermatic MIG machines. As far as the MIG, the stick, and the DC TIG, those are available in all of our Multimatic multiprocess machines. But now this screen we're looking at right here is our Multimatic 220 AC/DC. This is the only machine that has AC TIG in it, which gives you the capability to TIG weld aluminum. If you look over on the right-hand side, you can also see that there's a couple options on how you want to start your TIG arc. Do you want to use a lift arc TIG like you do on the other Multimatics, or this machine actually gives you the capability to select high frequencies, so that way you can start the high frequencies similar to that of a industrial machine. So once you get this machine set up, now you basically have to select the wire diameter, your material thickness, and the machine will set your voltage and wire feed speed for you, and you can fine tune it from there.
Right, and that's one of the things that I really like about the AutoSet Elite, where if you look at those trapezoid shapes on there, anywhere within that range is going to be a weldable condition, especially for those who aren't welding every day. You go out, you type in, like Chris said, a couple different variables, your wire that you're using and the size material that you're welding on, and you can go on the low end of one of those knobs and the high end of the other. It's still going to be a good, solid, weldable condition where you don't have to spend a half hour on a project trying to understand what's going on in your process, what's wrong, are you making a decent weld, something like that. So it makes it very intuitive to set up with that. If we look at, I'm going to bounce back here a little bit to another faceplate photo. Like Chris had mentioned, we can also look at the AutoSet versus just the manual settings. So it's these machines too, you can go back in if for whatever reason you don't like the AutoSet, don't need the AutoSet, you have a special condition you want to run. All you got to do is hit the button in the middle of that screen, and you're back to a standard setup in a machine. So it's very easy there to set that up by typing in your functions if you want to, or if you want to shut it off, you can do that as well. So I'm just looking to see if we have any questions coming in that anybody wanted to answer. Again, if you guys have anything along the way that we can't get to here live, we'll be on for another 10 minutes or so. But anything that you guys have afterwards, please submit that to the email that James had put in the chat function, and we'll try to get back as many of those emails as we can. Also looking for some feedback on what you guys would like to see in future versions of this program as well.
Okay, I do have one question. Someone asked, have we fixed the problem with dust getting into the relays and ruining boards? One of the things is all the boards that Miller makes are conformally coated with varnish on them. So as far as components, critical components are covered with varnish. Also, some of our engine drive units also have, they say, a vault where PC boards are put into them. So that way they're a little bit more extreme environments that vault, if you will, has a seal on it also to prevent dust and dirt from getting in there.
And a couple of the other things we had talked about a little bit, the MVP, this is a multi-voltage plug. So we had talked about the ease of being able to change some of these machines over from 115 to 240 power, or 120 to 240 power. All you have to do on that plug is physically there's a screw connector on the back side of it, pull the plug apart. There's 2 arrows. You plug it back together. That machine's automatically going to link to whether you're on 240 or 120. And it's as simple as that. So you don't have to worry about having a toggle switch wrong, anything like that, when you go to set the machine up and plug it in and destroy anything on the internals. Another fairly new feature in the last year or so on these machines is going to be a newer series of gun. So Chris, do you want to talk about that gun a little bit as well?
Yeah, about 2 years ago, Miller came out with a new gun called the MDX series. And the couple enhancements that were made to this gun help out with some of the common issues that we see when people are having issues with the welding machine. A lot of common questions that people get when to our service technicians are saying, you know, my wire is burning back into the tip, my arc starts are stumbling. But probably the nicest feature about this gun is the liner. The liner now loads from the front of the gun versus the back of the gun. And the reason that's important is when the liner led from the back, people would cut it off in the top, put their diffuser and contact tip in. But a lot of times that liner was cut too short. So as people are using the gun and twisting the gun, that liner would actually shrink inside. And now you'd get a gap between the liner and the diffuser. And this would create a misalignment of the wire, which would give you wire feed issues. So by having the liner load from the front to the back, now when it goes in, that diffuser is seated tight against the liner, and that liner is not going to move, so it's going to give you the proper fit up there every time. Another nice feature about this gun is we improved the ergonomics of it. On the back side of it, we have put a ball and socket on the back side of the gun, so instead of, as you're moving the gun around, the cable's not dragging, if you will, so it's going to give you a little bit more flexibility. We've heard a lot of good feedback from the field saying, you know, people welding all day long by going to the new gun, there's less fatigue on their wrist, and you know, at the end of the day, they're feeling a lot better.
Perfect. And on some of the larger Multimatic style machines too, with the pulse capability, we have the option to run a little bit heavier duty consumable in there. You know, that contact tip's going to last a whole lot longer for those of you who are running pulse capability as well. James had let me know we did have a question on generator power that we talked a little bit about, but making sure we want to cover that question. That question was basically, with generators with dirty power, are inverters better or worse than some of the older technology?
As far as on the dirty power, the inverter is better because, as Travis was saying, you take the power in, it gets converted, and then switched back and forth inside from AC to DC to AC to DC. So it's a little more complicated what we need to get into. But what happens is it's a better filter. It's a more robust type of system versus the old 60 hertz transformer, which was more susceptible to the dirty noise and stuff. So because an inverter machine being at a higher frequency is more less susceptible to dirty noise.
Right. Those older style machines with the copper transformers and stabilizers, basically you're relying on the magnetics of those machines to give you a stable output. So the minute you start fluctuating what you're giving them, they start in, you know, twofold or threefold, fourfold, making that same change that you had on the incoming, you know, twice as bad or 3 times as bad as what you see on the output, where these style inverters are taking and leveling that out before it ever gets to the gun.
Right.
So we'll wait to see if we got a couple more questions here. Like I said, we're going to be on for just a couple more minutes. We'll try to answer any of you guys' questions that you guys have for us through James in the chat function. But again, if you guys have anything else, please put that in the email that James had sent through that chat function. And again, we're going to be looking for some content questions, whether it's a process, a technology, a machine specific question, things like that you guys would like to see in a future presentation. Please let us know. We want to cover as much of this stuff for you guys that we can.
Okay. I got another question in here. Someone's asking, how many years does Miller expect to support machines, supply parts, labor for maintenance and repair? Miller's policy for machines at end of life when a machine is discontinued from Miller Electric, the goal for our products is to support that product after it's been discontinued for 7 years.
James, any other questions we can answer for him? It's good. It's looking like we answered most of them for everybody. So again, we appreciate everybody joining us today. We'll hang on here just for a couple more minutes. Coming back to, some of the big benefits of inverter technology, 3-in-1 style multi-process machines today versus those older style machines, a lot of it's going to come down to electrical control. And you're seeing this again in the newer machine platforms, even to kind of the home hobby market and light industrial market, but it is not a new technology. It's been around for years and years. Another thing that is fairly new is the LCD screens, and I see that's a question that we had is, how durable is that screen on those type of machines where you have that color display or an LCD display?
I can answer that, Travis. We've been using LCD displays in our Multimatic machines since 2012, so about 9 years. And what we do is the lens or the LCD display has not been an issue. Another thing with all of our machines that have LCD displays also have a lens over the front of it. So it's kind of like a welding lens. So if there's grinding dust or spatter does get into the front of the machine, that lens is replaceable. So that way you can always continue to replace that. So that way we're protecting the LCD from some of those, the dust and dirt and grime in a typical weld shop.
And like Chris said, that again, that's something that's not brand new to the market, but it is something that, compared to the older dial style machines, is a night and day difference in what we can display to the end user as far as that setup of process goes, or the setup of the machine. Like Chris said, a lot of these newer style machines will actually tell you if you have something wrong in an error message right on the machine. So say the 220, I've got it set up for MIG welding, and I turn it over in the settings to the TIG welding side, it's going to tell me that I need to change my cable setup before that will work. So we can display a lot more information there than what we could have in the older style machines as well.
We have a question regarding the Multimatic 220. What are the pulse capabilities? For TIG welding, we have on DC, you have the capability of the frequency that goes from 0 up to 150 pulses per second. And on the AC side, what we have is the capability of adjusting our balance control and also the frequency.
Now, on that machine, we're not going to have pulse capability on the MIG side, correct? But if we look at a machine like the 255, we gain that.
Right. As far as MIG capabilities, right, it's just conventional short circuit transfer, but the Millermatic or Multimatic 255 does have pulse capabilities for MIG, for steel, stainless steel, aluminum, metal core wire.
So if you guys are looking for different processes, things like that, like Chris had said, there's different machines out there for what you guys may need in the Multimatic family or even in the Millermatic family for some of the newer machines that replace the old 35s, if you guys still have those running in the shop, or the old 200 that a lot of people like when it's time to come to update those. So again, we appreciate your time today. For any future shows that you guys would like to see, please drop us an email at the shoptalklive@millerwelds.com, or any questions that you guys have left over yet from today. We'll cover those as well for as many of you as we can. And again, if you have feedback on a topic, a machine, a process suggestion, something like that that you want to see on Shop Talk Live, please let us know. Again, thanks for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us again at Miller Shop Talk Live. Have a great day.